Welcome to the Sacred Emergence Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Wong, and I'm so thrilled that you're here. This is a place where you'll be guided to living your most aligned life so that your truest, most radiant self can emerge. We'll be jamming on topics ranging from spirituality, entrepreneurship, to wellness and lifestyle design, and everything in between that can support you to grow, evolve, and shine, all the while not taking ourselves too seriously. So if you're ready to step into your leadership, break through limiting beliefs, own all of who you are, and expand in abundance, grab yourself your faith cup of tea and let's dive in. Hey, welcome back to the Sacred Emergence Podcast. I am so excited to reintroduce you to Megan Clinton, who is a returning guest. I will put in Megan's first interview in the show notes. But I purposely put her interview after last week's episode, which was a solo episode around spiritual bypassing, because I feel like my conversation with Megan goes really deep into the complexities of being human and holding trauma and the process of healing trauma. And Megan does such a great job of unpacking all of these layers that we have. And it's really an invitation for everybody to go even deeper with their work, with themselves, especially if, if you're listening and you are a coach or a mentor and working with clients. Megan's work also works with therapists as well. So I really enjoyed my conversation with Megan, and I trust that you will gain lots of wisdom and insights from our conversation together. And if this episode resonates with you, as with any of the episodes that are published, please share it with someone whom you think can benefit. And I would appreciate that. The person being interviewed would appreciate that. And obviously the person receiving the recommendation will also appreciate that. Without further ado, here is my interview with Megan. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Sacred Emergence Podcast. I am so excited to welcome back our returning guest, Megan Clinton, who's also a dear friend of mine and an amazing therapist. And she was here last season when we talked about trauma and children and just like how, raising children, and just like trauma in our lives. And I really wanted Megan to come back to talk about something that is actually, I just think is more prevalent, and just there's so many different topics that I want to talk about. And I'm like, Megan. So welcome back to the show, Megan.
Oh, lovely one. Thank you for the beautiful introduction. And it's so lovely to be here again. It really is.
Yeah, well, I wanted to have you back, particularly around the topic of coaching and talking about trauma, because I think now coaching is pretty like mainstream. I think so. I think we've all heard of even sport coaches and stuff. I'm talking about like life coaches, business coaches, and trauma. And it's because you have a very fresh perspective around it. And then there's other aspects if we have time that I want to talk about. But yeah.
I think it's so important. I think, yes, I agree with you that coaching is becoming more and more mainstream. I think as well, also a lot of people go to coaches rather than therapists because therapy comes with so much history, especially for women who have been made wrong over centuries, basically, for having emotions or for getting too emotional and have been like burnt at the stake. They've been locked up, they've been institutionalized. So the thought of going for therapy is almost associated with like being wrong in some way, and that they need to be fixed. So I think what happens then is that people tend to then move into the coaching world rather than therapy world. And a lot of the time they're actually carrying quite a lot of trauma. And what's happening is in a lot of different spaces in the coaching world, there's not a good understanding of trauma. And then coaches are faced with holding situations where they recognize something really big is coming up. And there's not necessarily the skills or tools to understand this is trauma and that it needs attending to in a different kind of way. And this is why I'm really advocating, and I think is already starting to happen in so many different places in the coaching world, that the recognition that there needs to be a better understanding of trauma, and that coaches need some kind of training in what trauma looks like, either to learn to hold aspects of it themselves or to recognize when to say to a client, I think in this instance with this situation, it might be useful to go and speak to a therapist, and then to have therapists that they know, that they, are working closely with, and that the client can then go and do a little bit of work around that and then come back possibly. Or what I really hold is that the coaches, if coaches get training themselves, I think that is profoundly important. And the reason for that is, when we choose somebody to work with, we choose them for a variety of different reasons. And when you go out and you reach out and you're feeling vulnerable and you say, I choose you, and the person says, actually, you're too much, or I can't do this, you need to go somewhere else. Often that person won't go somewhere else because they chose the particular person for very specific reasons. So instead, when coaches learn how to hold trauma and, in ways, it doesn't need to be complicated. It does really, when it comes down to the crux of holding trauma, a lot of the time, it's actually learning to listen effectively so the person can be heard in a way that when the hurt first occurred, they weren't.
Oh, it's so good. I feel like, trauma, I feel like used to be a word, is like nobody wants to, like, it's such a big topic, right? Like, oh, trauma, let's not even go there. But I just feel like in the recent years, it's just more, it's coming to the surface of like, we all carry trauma. And it can show up in so many different ways, and trauma doesn't have to be big life events. It could be little ones, even like small events. And I have this mindset of like, everyone needs to get healing, like regardless of if they think they do or don't, like go see a therapist that's somatically trained so that it could be processed through the body. And like, I think with coaching, like what you said, around a lot of people like hesitant maybe to go to therapists because of past stigma or whatever, reputation. I feel like, I don't know, like I feel like there's a disconnect when coaches are maybe coaching clients and like there's no movement, right? Or there's just something there that's missing. And that's another piece I wanted to talk about, because I'm like, well, a lot of coaching trainings don't talk about the deeper layers, like being trauma informed, which is maybe a different conversation because there's different layers there. I mean, there's so many things we can touch upon, but it's like, I feel like what you were saying around like, how do you hold space for a client, and also like, do they have the skills and recognizing it? Otherwise it's like, well, why isn't this client moving forward?
And I think that's so important. And I think that's something a lot of both the client and the coach kind of come up against. It's like, if something repeats, this can be one of the things, why is this coming up again and again? Or when I offer a client something, why aren't they doing what I'm suggesting? Or, why they're being resistant to it, or why they're moving away from it. A lot of these things, when we come up against them and they look like they won't move, or the person won't move in the direction that someone's suggesting, it is then that need to recognize that that's actually probably unhealed hurt and trauma that's coming up there. And instead of trying to push the person forward, then there's that recognition, actually, maybe something needs to be held here. So actually, we need to slow down. We need to listen. We need to be able to hold the person, as you so beautifully saying, that somatic kind of combination is so important, because when we're actually bringing healing, what we're trying to do is kind of bring the person back into wholeness. So we're bringing like the emotional, cognitive, and the somatic sense all into one, so that instead of what happens with trauma is we're mostly functioning from the head up. And so when we are trying to process something, to heal from something, we have very little of our full body experience, which is why the somatic element is so important, because we're kind of bringing more of our being into kind of processing something that's coming up. And then we bring more of our being into the world. But just to go back a little bit to, before you jump in there just for a sec, just to finish that off, if I may, it's that, when coaches are bumping up into this kind of nothing will work, and the client's not doing what I'm saying, what can happen is that it can leave the client going, well, the coach is so good. They teach all these other people to do these amazing things. It seems to work for all these other people. If it's not working for me, there's something wrong with me. And that's the one aspect that can come. So it leaves the client feeling shamed and wrong, and they leave. And mostly they don't have a conversation. They just, people will notice they just disappear. They stop speaking. A whole lot of things start to happen as they shut down. Or an aware coach might go, is there something wrong with me? And a less aware coach might go, there's something wrong with the client. I can't work with this person. They're not doing what I'm saying. They must not be doing the work. They're lazy. There can be a whole lot of judgments when all there is there's trauma showing up. And when we understand that, it offers a little bit more light and spaciousness into something that can get quite stuck and leave people feeling wrong or being made wrong. And I think that's why it's so critically important that anybody working with other people really needs to understand trauma, at least at some level, even if they don't want to work with it specifically, so that when these situations show up, there's an understanding of what's actually happening.
Yeah, I feel like I wonder if there's resistance, like for potentially like coaches to go down that route somehow. Like, I don't know, like just because like you said, like a lot of people will not go to therapy, they'll go to coaches instead. So it's almost like a replacement, and hoping that, because coaching, I can see it being more action oriented, like let's move forward. And as you were talking about, like, with therapy, the somatic based, like, I think a lot of times people associate therapy with talk therapy. Like we just talk, we can talk for years and years. And, I had one session with this coach and everything was good. Like, and so I feel like I don't know. I think there's so many different types of therapy that people don't know that there's different types. And then there's like, I think depending on the training with coaching, right? Some people are certified, like it's based on life experience. It's like, there's just so many aspects. And so that's why I really want to have this conversation, just because like how I think trauma, in terms of the definition of trauma, like how would you define it? Because I don't think there's one definition.
No. And, there have been a lot of amazing people who've defined trauma and talked about trauma long before me. And I found my own way of talking about it. So when I talk about trauma, so when a hurt first occurs, it gets processed. So what we're doing is something happens in our body and then we process it. Now, if there's not enough safety or connection, so we don't feel safe enough and there's nobody there that we can connect with, instead of it coming through our body and out, it gets locked away. So trauma can happen at a lot of different levels. It can be, our personal trauma, which can be event-based. It can be developmental trauma. And most people are holding a level of developmental trauma, because what's happening is in our lineage, patterns are getting passed down again and again, and they mostly get passed down through parenting and our experience of having our parents do something similar to what was done to them when they were younger. And then that then informs the collective trauma, the kind of soup within which we swim. And then there come societal beliefs and patterns and all sorts of things that then impact as well. They impact our choice, they impact our autonomy and our way of kind of being in the world, our passion, our needs, our desires in the world. So when trauma happens, what happens is when there's not enough safety or connection, our body becomes flooded and overwhelmed. So as a child particularly, we are unable to process something unless there's a parent there that can actually be with us and hold us and allow us to process. So we lock these younger parts of us away, or from particular events we can lock away. And then when something happens in the present moment that is similar to the past in some way, that's when we talk about an activation. That's when the past is coming into the present to be heard. Now, a lot of times in the coaching world, there's a lot of talk about, trying to support people to avoid those situations where they get activated. It's like only surround yourself with people who are like this, or set up a boundary that prevents you getting hurt. Now, there's nothing wrong with boundaries, of listening to our yes and no, but when we're trying to hold the world at bay, what we are doing is we're kind of keeping everything that needs to be processed and felt locked in, as opposed to going, when that hurts, if I really sit with that emotion and I'm able to be with it, see what it feels like in my body, deeply attuned to it, it actually moves through. And the next time a situation that comes up that looks similar, we don't get touched in the same way. So even though the outside world is still responding to us in the same way, there's nothing for it to touch inside us. And that's what happens with healing, is that as we heal, there's less and less gets activated because there's nothing from the past that is getting poked from the present moment. So it's not about sort of doing a whole lot of things. It's more about really staying with and attuning to ourselves and having the connection from the outside world that enables us to really be with these feelings. Because when they happened when we were younger, it feels like unbearable, absolutely unbearable. So we have this sense in our being that this emotion is going to be unbearable to experience when we're older. And actually, once it comes out and we cry, that sense of release is huge. They talk about that thing of holding all the balloons down underwater and how much energy it takes. And it's actually, once the release happens, that's far less energy than it was kind of holding everything down.
There was something like you and I were talking around, like, even like in the journey of with a coach, because you and I have worked with coaches, and you had this beautiful observation around once something is achieved, you don't know how it was achieved. I don't know if we talked about it in our last interview.
Yes, it was actually, it's something I remember because we've both been in Melanie and Leah's world and her beautiful world and everything, and the incredible work she brings. And I remember her saying, people will get to a point in their life where they're like, wow, everything is amazing. And they will look back and they will not remember how they got there. And then they will start to teach all the things they did, all the different things that they did, believing those are what got them there. And that will not be what got them there. And when she was saying that, I was like, I absolutely resonate with that. And it's because along that journey we heal. Because like parenting, growing a business, it touches all the parts that are unhealed in us relentlessly. And we heal along the way. And as excruciating as it is, we heal. And then we get to this place and we go, well, what did I do? And it was actually not about doing. It was actually about the healing, that journey that we took each time something hurt, of being able to feel what happened in the past and couldn't be heard, then we feel in the present moment and we cry or whatever we need to do. and then that gets processed. And as all those different parts get touched and we progress along that journey in our business, we get to that place and go, wow, I don't know how I got here. And I'll often hear clients say to me, I don't even remember what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago. It was so incredibly painful and I don't know what it was. And they're like, I need a lesson or something, don't I? I need to remember what I did. And I went, actually, this is what's so different about the coaching and the therapy world, is because in therapy, we're not looking at like, okay, when this happens, you do these 3 steps. It's more, you actually stay with what is and allow that process to take place. And then when it's healed, it's healed. There's no steps needed to go back there. It's moved on. Something else will come up and you'll heal something else. And so there's no need to go, okay, like when I did my journey or this, that, and the other, I needed to do A, B, and C kind of thing.
I chuckled to myself, and you're like, you don't have to like go back and analyze all that because something else will happen. Oh, life.
Yes, there will always be more. And I think what's so important to realize in this as well is that, it can be so easy, particularly people that hold complex trauma or more complicated trauma from when they were younger, the journey of kind of relating in the world, building a business, all these different things, parenting, can be so much more complicated because we have that much more to heal. And it can be so tempting to look at these sort of shiny golden paths that some people are on and go, I want to go there. And in order to go there in a speed or quickly, it means we need to bypass certain parts of ourselves. And then our trauma isn't being healed. And I think that's incredibly important. I think in some parts of the coaching world, I can see people go, come here, I've got this code. There's like a quick fix to something. And when you hold deep trauma and it's been excruciatingly painful, it's so tempting. If someone says, I can fix this for you, of course you want to go there. And then only to find that the trauma is going to take time. There's no quick fix to trauma. And I think that's one of the things I'd love to see in more parts of the coaching world, that real recognition that it takes time. This is not a speedy thing, and particularly for people who carry a lot of trauma.
The conversation around bypass, because you mentioned bypassing, I think it's actually a huge topic. I touched upon it in one of my solo episodes that at this time of recording, it has not yet been published, but it's like, there's bypassing through gratitude, which is like, what, which I would love to touch upon. But like, there's just so much, because you look at the spiritual world and there's almost like rising above, like that attitude of rising above, even looking at forgiveness. There's all these aspects of like, well, the body might not be ready. Even logically, it might be like, oh, it makes sense. But the body, so I would love to talk about like something as seemingly harmless as like, and good for gratitude, right? Because I see, not even in the coaching world, and I don't think you and I are picking on the coaching world. It's just, it's so prevalent, and there are so many coaches. It's like, hey, like this is another layer that we can all improve upon to be better coaches. You know what I mean? Just have more awareness for working with clients. But it's like, I was taught even before, like even growing up as being raised as a Catholic, it's like, it's all like prayers and gratitude. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's beautiful. And I think there's a time where people jump too quickly to gratitude and they bypass. So I'd love to talk more about that.
No, I love that as well. And it's certainly, everything that I say, it's not to make a part of the industry wrong. There are a lot of parts of the coaching industry that very deeply hold trauma, and a recognition that coaches need, to work one-on-one, doing their own work, that they need an understanding of trauma, that they need supervision. And there are a lot of spaces this is being talked about as well. So it's just, noticing in certain parts, and that can happen in the coaching world as it can happen in society, as it can happen in parenting as well. It's not, picking anything out particularly, but noticing threads that can come through absolutely in society. And you pick on that so beautifully, is that, this comes through religion, it can come through, just societal norms, it can come through education systems of like, focus on the good, don't focus on the bad, be grateful rather than worrying about what's difficult in your life. And sometimes it can be useful, and as extreme as this example is, I think sometimes it's easier to get. So if somebody has depression, so we know depression is, really, really hard. A lot of people struggle with it. You wouldn't go to somebody who is struggling with depression and just say, why don't you feel happier today? Because we know that's not possible. And as you know, you laugh, and of course anybody would laugh because it's ridiculous. But then when you take it to the other end, and when somebody's like, oh, I'm just struggling a little bit in my life, and we go, why don't you be grateful? It is the same thing. It's, I use the extreme example so that we kind of really can understand what we're talking about. And it's not that there's anything wrong with gratitude. I think gratitude is one of the most beautiful emotions to feel. But I think gratitude comes from when we process something from what is. So I talk a lot about toxic positivity, as when it comes at the expense of what we are really experiencing in the moment. When someone makes us wrong for what we're feeling, when somebody said, oh, well, you should be grateful for what you have and not feel sad or frustrated or disappointed or angry or rageful about what is happening in the moment. And that's when it can be toxic. When we instead can go, okay, there's something from the past coming into the present moment that's needing to be healed. That's what's happening. It's not a bad emotion. Emotions are never bad. They are just emotions. And when they're heard, they arise up in the body and they move through. And that's just a constant process that happens. And when we can allow that healing to take place, we find ourselves naturally in a place then where we feel gratitude, we feel connection, we feel unconditional love. And if we're looking, at achieving a certain vibration, when they measure it, unconditional love is actually the highest one. And that is our natural state of being, is unconditional love. It's not something we have to force. And, you hear in a lot of places, well, fake it till you make it. And I think that's actually bypassing a lot of trauma that people are holding that really needs to be healed. And when we heal that, we return to that place. When we heal all these layers, these protective processes, all these ways we've learned to be in the world to keep ourselves safe, they fall away. We're left with a being that is love, that is connection, that is creativity, that is all these amazing things.
I love that. I feel like even just like the positivity that you said, like toxic positivity, like sometimes like it's like naming the thing that is frustrating is to somebody, right? I feel like can be very healing. Just like saying it out loud. And spending some time like, oh my God, like that was just really annoying. And just being able to say it. And I feel like sometimes it just, around like, I think this is why I wanted this conversation, because it's like, we all want to be upbeat and generally positive people, and not be the complainer. You know what I mean? But I will say there's something so refreshing when, like, oh my God, that was really frustrating, and someone said it, right? We don't, you know what I mean? And there's just like a sense of relief, like when the truth has been spoken, rather than, oh, okay, well, I don't want to, be the dark energy or whatever. And so that's like even something as simple as just calling out how we're feeling in the moment, I think is so powerful. Rather than stuffing something down because, well, I don't want to ruffle feathers or whatever.
I love that. And it's so beautiful. And I think there are a whole lot of elements when you speak like that, when someone's able to say what's happening in that moment, particularly, if we're in a group and we're naming something for ourselves, mostly other people are having a similar experience. And you can almost, from a systems-based approach or a systemics-based approach, is when we're able to name different parts that different people are feeling. You can feel people's systems start to settle because something isn't being hidden in a corner. So when we can actually say what we feel, then we can actually cleanly communicate with the other person because they know where you stand. And then we can start to actually have an honest conversation. Whereas when we're trying to keep positive or high vibe, or all these different things, we're kind of, they're bits that are kind of getting locked away and pushed under the carpet and things. And it actually prevents deeply authentic communication. And, for authentic communication to happen, there needs to be vulnerability. And when there's vulnerability and being able to say the things, particularly the things that are harder to say, or, are maybe opening something up that most people would like to look away from, it actually allows people to actually connect more intimately when we do that. And ultimately, we want intimate connection with ourselves and those around us, so that being able to be honest about what we're experiencing and feeling in the moment actually allows that intimacy to occur.
Yeah, I think that's the piece with I feel like the more I learn about trauma and just processing my own trauma and just, studying deeper around these areas, it's like when I try to have deeper conversations with people, like depends, I'm like, okay, I can't go there with this person because it's like, I just feel like I might be, I don't know. It's like, it's very different, the levels of conversation, because I think a lot of times there's this level of can't get there. I don't know. It's like, there's this saying, like as you get older, it's really rare to have like 5 circle of friends that is really, really deep and authentic. Like if you have 1 or 2, that's such a gift and it's amazing, and I'm just like, I understand that now.
Yeah. No, and I think we can only go as deep with the other as we've gone with ourselves. So they will get to a point where, and I think generally in society, I talk about like we mostly come up against a wall of disconnection because there is so much trauma held in the world. And mostly we're holding that trauma at bay in some way, that there isn't that capacity to connect in most places, and that it's quite rare to find places where we can actually share something that's hard, be heard, be held, and given unconditional love when we do share.
Yeah. And as even like in this conversation, like going back to like I find like in a coaching container or whatever, like that's a really great area where we, like, I think like whatever, when we were working with a professional or an expert, there's almost like, oh, this is where I could bring something that, that might have come up. And I feel like, because you have a beautiful program that I wanted to also talk about, but I feel like there's so much power in being able to listen and just hold space and not offer a solution. And I think maybe there's this mentality out there that that's somehow not enough. And therefore let's try to solve it. And therefore the gratitude, like let's be in action, when holding space and allowing the listening, I mean, that is the action. It's just, it doesn't seem as valuable. But for the receiving person, that's actually all they really need. I mean, I've experienced that as a recipient. Like I just want to be heard,
Yes, and I think I think you touch on that so beautifully as well, is that mostly we actually don't need somebody to do something for us. We're highly intelligent human beings. Mostly we can figure out the doing part quite easily. Once we've been heard, the doing part comes more easily and it's clearer for us. And that's not to dismiss kind of coaching at any kind of level. It's just saying that when someone's stuck like that, when they're really needing to be heard, that nothing needs to be done in that moment. It's being able to create the space. And I think sometimes there is a little bit of that understanding in a lot of places, different places in the world. But how you listen is not simply by going, okay, you speak and I won't speak. There is a process that allows the person to continue speaking in a way that feels like the other person is meeting them in each step and actually holding them in a way that they can actually go through from one end to the other, and be heard, allow the feelings to come up and to be processed and to be released. And I think so often it's just like, you speak, I listen, and then it's done. And often if we don't really feel the other person there, that they actually are with us in the depth of our emotions, that healing doesn't happen, because then it's almost like it's speaking into a void. It's like the person isn't there. When they don't learn a way of actually staying deeply connected with that person as they process. And also, as you say, and you bring in the somatic stuff, it's like it's really helping them kind of connect all the different parts. And although for many people they're like, oh, that all just sounds so complicated, I don't want to learn how to do that, it actually can be quite simple. We can learn quite simple steps that can very effectively enable somebody to listen to somebody's trauma so that it can be healed.
Two questions there. One is, do you think there might be fear around like listening to someone else's trauma, and maybe it's like, oh my God, that activated my own trauma and therefore I don't want to go there? Like, do you think there's potential fear there?
I think there are a couple of different levels of fear. One is that, I'm never going to learn these skills. It's beyond me. People spend years learning how to be therapists. So, some of the training that I'm bringing is not to teach someone how to be a therapist, but to listen like one. So it's to learn some easy tools to be able to do it. And I think as well that is, and I think that's that part of like, it's going to be too much for me. I'm actually not going to be able to hold that because it's so big for the other person. And I think that's why this model of, if we're holding other people, that we need to actually be getting one-on-one therapy ourselves, not always, but so that we have a sense in our own body of what it's like to be held. And you actually get something there as well. And that we have supervision. So when our clients bring, because all our clients carry trauma at different levels, but every single client somebody works with will be bringing trauma, is that when it comes up, we can go to somebody and go, hey, this and this happened. I did this, but I'm not sure how effective it was. And this is why therapists have supervision as well, because it does take time. You learn the theory, but then to actually be able to practice it and be able to hold it in a whole lot of different situations, because human beings are complicated, and everyone will approach something slightly differently, that you can go to the person and go, hey, how would you do this, or what was happening, or this got activated in me, and then you can process that. So it's a sort of a 3-step, we get our own one-on-one therapy, we get supervision, and we get training on how to actually hold it.
I love that. I think the word supervision always throws me off, because I'm like, I'm going to be supervised? They're going to watch over me? Like, what is that? But the way that you're describing it is more like, it's almost like mentorship in a way. It's like, oh, I'm working in a client session. This came up. I don't know if it was effective. So you have someone to go to and be like, hey, like, what would you have suggested? Or was this the right thing? And it's almost like getting mentored.
Yes, it's exactly. It's, I suppose in the therapeutic world, we talk about it as supervision and we understand very clearly what that means. But it's like, okay, these are the clients, this client said something and it touched on something when I was younger. and you get to process it so that when you go and sit with your client, you've processed that part. So you can kind of cleanly sit alongside them. Or it's like, hey, we were working along, I was tracking along, was listening to them, and then I asked this question and everything went pear-shaped after that. Do you have any kind of insight as to what happened, or what you do next time? Or we stuck here, we keep getting to this place and we get stuck every time we get here. And yeah, so it's mentorship as to, different ways you can start to work. And it's really having somebody holding your back as you hold somebody else.
I can see how powerful that would be in a coaching training. And it's funny because now that you say that, I'm like, oh, because I'm getting my breathwork facilitation training, and there is quote unquote supervision. But it's the whole, like, we have like basically a year of being able to bring questions and to the facilitator and other people. And I'm like, that, like, when I signed up for that program, I was like, that is worth, like, that's worth the 400 hours that I'm doing, because it's included. That I've not seen other training programs and a lot of coaching programs. I don't see that. And so I love that you're calling out, like, this would be a really great thing. And so one of your offerings is listen like a therapist. And I feel like you offer something similar to that. Because I feel like you're seeing gaps, and this is an opportunity to fill in the gaps.
Yeah, so listen like a therapist has really come out of this kind of witnessing how important and useful and it would be for people who hold other people to have an understanding of our trauma and understand how to listen to it and help their clients heal. So it's for mentors, for coaches, and actually even for therapists. I have never seen anything like this in the therapeutic world either. And one of the things that has been one of my skills is to have like 3 days of training and be able to come out of it and kind of succinctly kind of bring it down to, a couple of sentences or paragraphs. So during my own training, some of the concepts are really complicated, and I found ways over the years to actually be able to explain them really simply. So while we do cover a lot, it's over a month, and there are 4 sessions, and then there's Voxer or Messenger support through that, so that the people doing it can really dive in deeply, ask lots of questions, so that by the time they've gone through all the different elements of it, that they're really clear when they come out the other end of all the theory that I'm bringing. And it's really bringing a kind of a deep understanding to how change takes place and how to support change in your clients, understanding when trauma is coming up. And with that information afterwards, we were talking about the supervision as well. So we learn all these different parts. And I've actually recently added everything that's covered in the training, because a couple of people that have done it went, oh, I jumped in and I got so much more than I expected, but I really had no idea what I was going to, receive from you. And I was like, oh, that's beautiful. And I love that people, know me and know what I bring and kind of trust it. In what I was talking about, but I thought actually it'd be really helpful. So, if you do go onto the link, it now says exactly what's included in that training. And then once the training's completed, I offer supervision, different types of supervision. So I offer supervision one-on-one to somebody who hasn't done the training. And then I offer group supervision to people who have done the training. So then that's at a lower cost, and you can come in at any time and ask questions. And then there's Zoom calls of which you can get to practice with other people if you want to. You can witness me working with somebody, and you can come in like we were talking about earlier and just go, I'm struggling with this, or this isn't working. So in those spaces, I hold a very high level of confidentiality. And that is that, nothing in that group gets spoken about outside the group in any shape or form, so that the people working with those people know that their material, what they've shared, even without their name, is absolutely held confidentially. And I think that element of confidentiality is so important, it can be so tempting in so many places to go, oh, I worked with my client and we shared this and we worked through this, in order for other people to understand how we work. And what can happen is that when people witness that, they might actually hold back when they work with somebody, because they then go, actually, I don't want to share that, because what if my coach or mentor or therapist or one then shares that online and they feel exposed? So I think a lot of healing actually doesn't happen in certain spaces when people witness people being talked about, and then they actually hold back. So I think confidentiality actually needs to be talked about more in the online world, that we need to go to somebody and go, are you willing for me to do this? Can I share this? Even though they've shared it online, can I share it in a different space or in a different context, so that people always feel safe, that when they say something in one place, it stays in that place. It's not taken from one place and shared somewhere else. So I think in the online world, because confidentially isn't held as cleanly, is that some of the healing it's actually constricting healing from taking place.
I love that. I feel like confidentiality is so important. And it's like, even like when I share a testimonial, like I will always get, like, I want to make sure it's safe to share. And I always ask, but that's like, this is going like, not even a testimonial, what you're talking about. It's like an actual, like in a container. Yeah. Which can be really hurtful if it's like, oh my God, did you just share something that I shared with you like privately? Yeah, I could totally.
And although names are never used in a lot of these instances, it's like it doesn't really make any difference. It can feel quite exposing. And I think what happens is other people witness it and then they don't bring the deeper parts, because then that feels unsafe.
Yeah. So just to clarify, so when you talk about your group holding confidentiality, is so like if I don't know, if a person comes in as a participant in the program, are they asking for permission from their clients to say, hey, I might bring in your stories? Or like, is that to get permission? Or are you meaning like everything that's shared in a group is not spoken outside? Like how, like,
so
what's
you
the
bring a very important thing. And when I work as a therapist, if I'm receiving supervision at the time, I've done enough hours over the years that I'd now just choose when I have supervision again. And then I will say to my clients, at the moment I'm receiving supervision, and I may take something that comes from our sessions, and it is completely confidential. It won't have your name associated with it, or a lot of the context, it mostly is process orientated when I take information or I take something to supervision, but that they know that information goes elsewhere, and they have a choice then to say yes or no. And what I say to them is, when I take it, it's in service of the work that we do together. It is always to make sure that I'm bringing the most that I can. And if there's something that could be added to it, then somebody else brings more there. So it is always in service of the person that I'm holding. And so, yes, in part that, and that's a conversation that then the coach or mentor who then comes into it needs to have with the clients. But it's certainly something that I suggest when there's supervision involved. And in any kind of context, when coaches receive coaching and they bring something from their client work, that they say, I'm working with another coach, and I may at times say to them, I'm really struggling here. What do you suggest? And without a name or anything, but they might be material. And that knowing that that coach then won't go, hey, I was online and I was working with my person and they brought this and we talked about that. And suddenly that person hears their story being shared. And then the other part of it is, in my containers that I hold it very firmly, the confidentiality. So for supervision in those containers, there would actually be a signed document. It's like, I've read this, I understand what it means. And it's not to say anything harsh, but I think the clearer we make it, the safer everybody feels. So when everybody signed the same document, then everyone goes, we're all on the same, we're on a level playing field. We all know what this means. We've all agreed to this. And if I step into this space, I know exactly what that means. So it's part of how I look at ensuring safety is well held in groups.
I was just going to say, like, that, just all of what you shared, it feels safe. And as like, if I was like, a client of one of the participants, I would feel even more held if it was brought up, like, hey, I'm getting additional training for, like, I would feel like, oh, awesome. Like, thank you for telling me. And for like the choice of if it's okay or not for myself, like that just deepens the respect that I have for that person. You know what I mean? And so I love the parameters that you're having with this work, because I feel like it builds a level of deeper trust and integrity, which I feel is so important. Yeah. And I love the clarity aspect, because it just keeps everybody on the same page, and it's like, okay, like, this is it. I love it.
And there are lots, I watch a lot of people do it in like the rules in Facebook groups and everything. And I think it really benefits to actually be spoken in some kind of way, be talked about. And depending on it, whether it's then somebody actually signs something physically, I think it makes a big difference, as opposed to just ticking boxes. I think something happens actually physically in our body differently.
Yeah, I will, like, even for my breathwork training program, the facilitator, she scheduled a one-on-one call with everybody, and she went through each of the terms of the conditions. And like, I've never had that before. And I was like, oh my God, it just like, this is really serious. You know what I mean? But it made it in a way, it's like, well, now I know consciously that like I'm in this training for the next 400 hours. Like, like it just brought the level of commitment, which, yeah, I think that's a really powerful thing. So I love that you're offering this for people, the Listen Like a Therapist.
And as you said, like earlier, when somebody speaks something into a group, often the bits that are not spoken or pushed under the carpet, these are some of the bits that can be unspoken. There's like, what happens if somebody does this or shares this? But when somebody, as your beautiful trainer in your breath work, called all of you, it's very clear. Then none of it's being swept under the carpet. Every part is being attended to.
Yeah.
And that in the, when we're talking about trauma, there's a lack of safety when we experience it. So what we're trying to do is when we're talking about healing, we're trying to tend to all the parts to create a container that allows healing. So the first part is really tending to the safety. And then that's the holding that's needed for healing to happen.
That is so good. I love it. Man, I feel like we could talk forever on this topic, because it's just so good. And I feel like it's so relevant right now, I feel like. But yeah, so you're Listen Like a Therapist. Is there anything else you wanted to share that maybe a question I didn't ask, or?
I think we covered so much beautiful parts and places. And I think one of the things that can often come up for people wanting to do trauma training is, I think because there's more and more recognition of how important it is, I think people fear being shamed and seen for like not knowing enough. Like there's a whole lot of technical stuff and it's all going to be confusing or very academic or a whole lot of different things. And I think some people can actually step back from it for fear of being, made to look like they don't really know what they're doing or that they're wrong. And I think another aspect of it can also be like, am I going to have to throw the baby out with the bathwater? All the things that I've learned to date, all the, the practices that I've learned to date, I'm going to have to throw all of those out and when I learn about trauma. And I think really what, the program that I offer and trauma trainings are offering is like, it's bringing more. It's like, people bring incredible wisdom, their passion into the world, their knowing. And then when they understand trauma, it really allows clients to pick up their work and fly with it. And then those moments where they get stuck and they can't work out why people can't actually take up their work, then they get to understand those, support them in those moments, and then they can move forward with more ease again.
I love how you described all of that. It's like, it's just filling in the gaps, supplementing what they already know, to help boost and strengthen. Yeah, I love that. Well, amazing. Well, how can people learn more about your programs and connect with you?
So I run Listen Like a Therapist in 2 different time zones so that it accommodates people all over the world. And I used to run them concurrently, and it got too much for me to be able to hold people doing slightly different things a week apart. So I now do one time zone over 1 month, and then another month I do another time zone. So if you're sort of in the middle where I am, then you get to choose between 2 different time zones. But if you're either side of me, then so we're running one that's more kind of, I think, American orientated in August. And then in October, it's more Australia, Europe orientated. But I think Europe can pretty much, in the UK, can do either side.
Yes. Got to mention Megan is joining us from South Africa.
Yes. The Southern Hemisphere, where it's now winter and cold, and yes, watching all of you in your beautiful summer. Yes. All rugged up here. And what else? Yes, so once you've completed, it runs over a month, and there are 4 calls over Zoom. And then during the week, then we have a group Voxer that you can come in and ask questions. And then afterwards, there's that option for supervision. And
amazing.
Yes.
The link will be in the show notes for those that want to learn more. And then you're also, people can find you on Instagram and.
So they can find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and it's all under Megan Kate Clinton.
Amazing. So all the links will be in the show notes. Oh my gosh, I just love talking to you and all that you bring. So thank you for being a returning guest and for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you, lovely, and for your beautiful questions and insights and understandings. It's been really lovely to be here.
To help you feel more supported and nourished in your body and nervous system, you're invited to download the free I Am Supported meditation in the show notes. May you feel grounded in who you are as you become the fullest expression of yourself. Thank you for listening to the Sacred Emergence podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and thank you in advance for sharing with those who can benefit. Until next time.